Sky Veiled, What You Don't See in Control of You, Part 1. The Beginnings, Chapter 1. The Uneasy Sky Rachel. Carter had seen her share of strange weather patterns over the years, but today, as she gazed out over the horizon from her office window, a deep unease settled in the pit of her stomach. The sky was wrong. Long, thin streaks crisscrossed above, leaving pale scars against the otherwise bright blue expanse. They seemed too deliberate, too precise to be natural. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the streaks slowly dissolve, merging into wispy, translucent clouds. These clouds, however, didn't follow the usual patterns of atmospheric dispersion she had spent her career studying. She turned to her computer and tapped into the real-time satellite data from NOAA. Zooming in on her region, she noted the odd alignment of contrails again. The paths of the planes creating them were too rigid, intersecting at perfect angles, as if someone had plotted them on a grid. It wasn't just today either. She'd noticed the same patterns for weeks now, but each time she had brushed it off as mere coincidence. Yet, the more she observed, the more unsettling the formations became. Rachel had always believed in empirical data, hard facts, and the known laws of science. Her work as an atmospheric scientist was grounded in meticulous study, weather manipulation through cloud seeding, hurricane modeling, and understanding climate change. But this felt different. The chemtrails, as conspiracy theorists often called them, were typically dismissed by mainstream science. Until now, she'd thought the idea of deliberate atmospheric tampering was a wild notion at best. But now, as she looked at the rainwater samples she had been collecting over the past few weeks, a pattern emerged. Traces of chemicals that had no business being there. Aluminium, barium, and strontium in unusually high quantities. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to ignite her scientific curiosity and concern. Rachel grabbed her phone and dialed her colleague, Dr. Marcus Hall, a well-respected environmental toxicologist she had collaborated with on numerous projects over the years. "Marcus, I need your help with something." "What's going on, Rachel?" Marcus's voice was calm, steady, as always. "I've been running some tests on recent rain samples, and the chemical composition is off. It's strange, I'm seeing elevated levels of metals like barium and strontium. I'm thinking it might be contamination, but I don't know. It feels more deliberate." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Deliberate as in geoengineering? You know how dangerous that kind of talk can be? Rachel sighed. "I know, but I can't shake this feeling. These aren't just random pollutants. They're the kinds of metals used in weather modification technologies." Marcus hesitated before speaking. "You know as well as I do that any serious weather modification programs are heavily regulated, and they wouldn't use those compounds in such high concentrations." "Exactly," Rachel replied, "which makes this even stranger. I don't have enough data to make any solid conclusions, but if what I'm seeing is real, we could be dealing with something much bigger." The conversation lingered in her mind after they hung up. Rachel tried to push the creeping paranoia to the back of her thoughts, but it wasn't that easy. Her eyes drifted back to the sky, now fully transformed into a thin veil of gray clouds. Something was happening, and whether it was an anomaly or something more sinister, she intended to find out. Rachel pulled up historical weather data and cross-referenced it with flight paths and recorded chemical releases in the area. As she delved deeper into her research, her suspicion grew. The streaks she observed weren't just random emissions. They were clustered over specific regions that had recently experienced significant weather fluctuations. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she compiled a series of reports. There were connections she couldn't ignore. Elevated chemical traces, increased respiratory illnesses reported in the local population, sudden weather shifts. But as she put the pieces together, another realization began to surface. What she was investigating could put her at risk. A knock on her office door startled her out of her thoughts. It was Nathan, her lab assistant. "Dr. Carter, I just finished running those additional tests you requested on the rain samples. You're not going to believe this." He handed her the report, and Rachel's eyes widened as she scanned the results. Elevated concentrations of nanoparticles, something that could only have been introduced artificially. She set the report down with a trembling hand. "I don't understand," Nathan said, concern etched on his face. "Where's this coming from?" Rachel stared at the data, her heart pounding. "I don't know," she whispered, though deep down she was beginning to have an idea. There had been rumors, wild claims about weather control and population management programs, but they were always dismissed as fringe theories. "Can you run another test? I need confirmation before we take this further," Rachel said, her voice tight. Nathan nodded, though Rachel could see the doubt in his eyes. After he left, She sat alone in the quiet of her office, her mind racing. If this was what she feared, then she was on the edge of uncovering something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She glanced at the sky again, feeling the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on her. What if the chemtrails were more than just conspiracy theory? The rain that had once been a source of life and sustenance was now tainted. And as Rachel prepared to dive deeper into the data, she knew this was only the beginning. What she had stumbled upon could change everything. But how deep did the conspiracy go? And more importantly, who was behind it? The sky's veil had been lifted just enough to glimpse the truth. But now, Rachel feared, there would be no turning back. Chapter 2. A Whisper in the Clouds. Rachel sat in her dimly lit office, staring at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. Her inbox contained a message she wasn't sure she should open, but curiosity had already gotten the better of her. The subject line read, Operation Skyvial, the truth you've been looking for. The sender was anonymous, the email address an untraceable string of characters. She had been expecting something like this, ever since she started poking around in unexplained weather anomalies. But the speed at which this tip came through still rattled her. The chemtrails, the altered rainwater samples, the strange weather patterns. It all pointed to something bigger than she could have imagined. But an anonymous tip could be a trap just as much as it could be a breakthrough. Was someone watching her movements already? She glanced over her shoulder at the window, the faint outline of the sky still visible through the blinds. Clouds gathered again, the same persistent streaks crossing the horizon like a faint scar. She opened the message. You're not alone. They've been doing this for years, under your nose. Look into Operation Skyvial. It's not just weather control, they're manipulating populations. Meet me tomorrow. Park entrance 10 a.m. Follow the birds. _ There was no name, no further instructions, only this cryptic message. Rachel's heart raced. She had heard whispers of government projects like this before. Classified, off-the-books operations meant to manipulate the environment. Geoengineering was one thing, but this, population control? It seemed like a wild leap. Yet there was something unsettlingly familiar about the mention of Operation Skyvial. She closed her laptop, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. The risks were real, but if what this tip suggested was true, it would explain everything. Why the chemical compounds in her samples didn't add up. Why the patterns in the sky looked orchestrated rather than accidental. But who was this tipster? Someone from within? An insider ready to expose the truth? Or perhaps someone trying to lure her into a trap? An elaborate hoax to discredit her growing suspicions. Rachel leaned back in her chair, considering her options. She had built her career on evidence, on data that could be scrutinized and reproduced. Her instincts told her to dig deeper, but she also knew the dangers that came with pursuing hidden truths. She remembered her mentor, Dr. Henry Monroe, who had once advised her to always look beyond the surface, but be careful not to fall into the abyss. She pulled up an old file she had saved months earlier, labeled simply Skyvial, Potential Leads. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, just idle rumors about secret weather manipulation projects dating back to the Cold War. Operation Popeye had been real after all, a U.S. government initiative in the 1960s to extend the monsoon season in Vietnam through cloud seeding. If such things had been possible half a century ago, what could they do now? As she sifted through the documents, the words from the anonymous email echoed in her mind. It's not just weather control. They're manipulating populations. Geoengineering to control populations? The notion seemed far-fetched, the kind of thing that conspiracy theorists latched onto without understanding the science behind it. But as Rachel thought about the rain samples in her lab, the data that didn't make sense, a dark realization began to creep in. What if they weren't trying to fix the climate? What if they were altering it for a more insidious purpose? Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Marcus, her colleague. She debated whether to pick up, but finally did. Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, Marcus said without preamble. His tone was grave. I ran another test on those samples you sent over. There's something more here. Something I didn't catch before. The nanoparticles you found, they're active. They're responding to environmental stimuli in ways that shouldn't be possible. It's like they're engineered to interact with certain atmospheric conditions. Rachel's heart sank. What do you mean, engineered? I don't know, but this goes beyond normal pollution or industrial runoff. It's like they've been designed for a specific purpose. Someone is tampering with the environment, Rachel, and I'm not sure what they're trying to accomplish. The air seemed to grow heavier as his words settled in. Marcus, ever the rational scientist, sounded rattled. He didn't rattle easily. I've received a tip. Rachel said hesitantly. It mentioned something called Operation Skyvile. I don't know what it is yet, but I think it's connected to everything we've been seeing. Skyvile, Marcus repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. I've never heard of it, but if it's as big as it sounds, be careful. These things don't stay hidden by accident. If you dig too deep... I know the risks, Rachel said, cutting him off. She did know, perhaps better than Marcus realized. She had seen colleagues blacklisted, research buried, careers ruined, all because they had dared to look too closely at inconvenient truths. After the call ended, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that her world was about to change irrevocably. She checked the time. Tomorrow's meeting was at 10 a.m. She had less than 12 hours to prepare, less than 12 hours to decide if she would go down this path. Her laptop chimed, a notification flashing across the screen. Data upload complete. It was an archive from an old government database she had accessed earlier. The file, curiously enough, was labeled Skyvile. Rachel clicked it open, her breath catching in her throat as the documents loaded. Hundreds of pages. Internal memos, satellite images, weather reports. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and there it was. _ Project Skyvile. Objective. Weather manipulation for geosocial control. _. The whisper in the clouds had become a roar. Rachel closed the file and leaned back, the enormity of what she had stumbled upon crashing over her like a wave. Tomorrow, she would meet her informant. Tomorrow, she would follow the birds, and perhaps the truth would finally be revealed. But deep down, she knew, once she crossed this line, there would be no turning back. Chapter 3. Hidden in Plain Sight. The deeper Rachel delved into Operation Skyvile, the more disturbing the patterns became. Her search began in the dusty archives of Cold War experiments, operations shrouded in secrecy, justified by national security, and forgotten by most. But to Rachel, they were all too relevant, the echoes of the past reverberating into the present. She sat hunched over her desk, the glow from her computer screen illuminating her face as she scrolled through old documents and declassified reports. Project Storm Fury, a government initiative launched in the 1960s, aimed to modify hurricanes, steering them away from populated areas by seeding clouds with silver iodide. The goal was noble, but the results had been inconclusive, and the project was ultimately abandoned, or so the public was told. But Rachel's instincts screamed that these experiments hadn't just been dropped. They had evolved. The idea of controlling the weather for military and political purposes had too much potential. Project Storm Fury, Operation Popeye, where the U.S. used cloud seeding during the Vietnam War to extend the monsoon season and flood enemy supply routes. These were just the early chapters of a much longer, darker story. She pulled up a grainy satellite image from the 1970s, marked with lines of flight paths over the Pacific, planes dispersing particles in an attempt to manipulate tropical storms. It looked eerily similar to the flight paths she had been observing in her own research, crisscrossing the skies above her city, leaving chemtrails that faded into thin, unnatural clouds. Her pulse quickened. These weren't just relics of a bygone era. The projects were alive and well, their techniques refined, their reach expanded. If Operation Skyvile had grown out of these Cold War projects, then it wasn't just about controlling weather for military gains. It could be about controlling populations. Rachel opened another document, a heavily redacted memo from the early 1990s, referencing a new phase of geoengineering research. The title, Project Skyvile Phase 1, Atmospheric Manipulation for Global Stability. Global stability. The phrase sent a chill down her spine. Stabilizing what exactly? Weather or something much more insidious? She clicked through to a subsequent report, detailing a series of test runs in remote areas of the world: South America, Southeast Asia, the Arctic. These regions had seen strange atmospheric changes, spikes in unseasonal storms, droughts, and floods, all without explanation. There had been murmurs in scientific circles about the possibility of geoengineering gone rogue, but no one dared to speak up. It was too risky, too dangerous to accuse powerful governments and corporations of tampering with the planet's most fundamental systems. Rachel leaned back, her mind racing. If the government had been experimenting with weather control for decades, and now Operation Skyvile had brought those experiments into the 21st century, what was their endgame? Controlling populations through weather manipulation seemed extreme, far-fetched even, but the more she uncovered, the more plausible it became. Climate change, droughts, floods, food shortages. If someone could manipulate those factors, they could hold the world hostage. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Marcus. Found something interesting. Call me when you're free. She dialed him immediately, her breath coming short as she anticipated his findings. Rachel, Marcus answered, His voice hushed, almost conspiratorial. I've been looking deeper into the nanoparticles you mentioned. These aren't just passive pollutants. I ran a series of tests. They're responsive to electromagnetic fields. Whoever designed them knew exactly what they were doing. They can be activated, controlled remotely. Rachel's stomach dropped. Activated? For what purpose? That's the thing. I don't know yet, but it's not natural. These particles are embedded in the atmosphere, waiting for something. It's like they're part of a larger system. I've never seen anything like it. Rachel's mind reeled. Nanoparticles, weather manipulation, remote activation. It was all too much to take in, yet it all connected. If the skies were being filled with these particles, waiting to be triggered, then Operation Skyvia wasn't just about controlling the weather. It was about something far more sinister, perhaps even altering human behavior. Marcus, this goes deeper than we thought, Rachel said, her voice tight. I found documents connecting Skyvile to Cold War geoengineering projects. They've been refining these techniques for decades, and now they're using them on a global scale. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Rachel, if what you're saying is true, we're talking about mass-scale experimentation. The implications? I know. She rubbed her temple, the weight of it all pressing down on her. But we need more proof before we can do anything. There's a lab, off the grid. One of my contacts mentioned it a while back. He said they were testing experimental geoengineering technologies, but he didn't have details. I didn't pay attention to it then, but now... Rachel's pulse quickened. Where is it? Somewhere in the Nevada desert, near an old military base. I can get more information, but we'll need to move fast. If this operation is as big as we think, they won't take kindly to us snooping around. The line crackled for a moment before Marcus spoke again, his tone grim. Rachel, you know what we're getting into, right? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. Rachel looked out the window at the sky, the chemtrails lingering, slowly dissipating into the atmosphere. She thought of the sacrifices she would have to make, her career, her safety, her life as she knew it. But the truth was bigger than any of that. The world had to know what was happening, what these hidden powers were doing behind the veil of secrecy. I know, she said softly, her resolve hardening. But if we don't do this, who will? They ended the call, and Rachel sat in silence for a moment, letting the enormity of it all sink in. The Cold War experiments had been hidden in plain sight for decades, but now, with Operation Skyvile, the stakes were higher than ever. The truth was out there, but so were those who would stop at nothing to keep it buried. Tomorrow, she would set out for Nevada to uncover the secrets hidden in the desert. But tonight, she stared up at the sky, knowing that every streak, every cloud, carried the weight of a conspiracy decades in the making.